I'm attorney Phil Giacino, and this is Finding Common Ground here on Altice. You can see this show on Saturdays at 10 a.m. on Channel 115, and also Thursday mornings at 1 o'clock for you insomniacs, Channel 20. Got a special guest tonight, John M. Kennedy Jr. John has been on my show a while back. We did WLINY Internet Radio, and he's the Suffolk County Controller. He's been in that position since 2015. You were elected in 2014, and for 10 years prior to that, he was a Suffolk County legislator, I believe the 12th district.
Yes.
And somebody near and dear to your heart took over after you left that position.
As a matter of fact, she's doing a great job, and she's brought the office to a whole new level, shall we say.
That's good. And she will be my next guest. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, my background is, I'm 43 years in municipal service, as a matter of fact. I started when I was 19. I worked 10 years for the Office of Mental Health before I came over to county government. I came over, the very first county executive I worked under was Peter Cohalan, Judge Cohalan,
right,
who actually swore me in for my second, for my second term, as a matter of fact. It really was nice to see the circle kind of come around. But so I put in a lot of time in government and a lot of different operations. I worked in intergovernmental relations for Peter, and then Mike LeGrande and Bob Gaffney.
And you're an attorney, of course.
I am, as a matter of fact, and that's when I got my JD from St. John's, which I got going back to school. Like most things in life with both Leslie and I didn't follow the conventional route with education. We both got our education while working, while raising family. And I got my bachelor's from Stony Brook back in 1979. As a matter of fact, I graduated back when the Bridge to Nowhere really was a bridge to nowhere, if you remember it. And then I went to Adelphi and I got a master's in business administration with a concentration in capital budgeting. And I graduated from St. John's in 1994. Did it 4 years at night. You know the way we call that. That's the hard way.
Sure.
But it was great education, and it's really suited me well in bringing together all the different aspects that you have with comptroller. You need a financial background, and you need to be comfortable with numbers. You need to know how to read a balance sheet and be able to be comfortable with contracts. But the legal training and the legal education helps tremendously, because so much of what we do when we look at the audit process involves interpretation under contracts, and there's a significant amount of contract law that's involved. Unfortunately, more often than not, vendors seem to want to interpret something that goes far afield of what really was being sought, or what was in our mind, I guess, if you will, when we look to procure that service to begin with.
Right. So we all know what the county executive does. We know what a legislator does.
Yes.
Comptroller is a little murkier to the average person.
It is.
What exactly is your day like? What kinds of things do you do on a regular basis?
Well, on any given day, I'll be called to go ahead and deal with, first of all, let's lay the groundwork. Let's remember, I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer for the County of Suffolk. I have the responsibility for the integrity and the viability of a $3 billion annual operating budget and a capital budget that's north of about $110, $120 million a year.
Is that bigger than some small states?
As a matter of fact, yes. Remember, in size, we're larger than 11 states. Wow. And when you look at payroll, I have to certify the validity of payroll. We do a payroll every 14 days that's north of about $38 million. We pay 10,000 people, full-time employees. Unlike the federal government, we have not missed a payroll, or we have not, had a shutdown. I will tell you that our financial circumstances are extremely tight and very challenged. There's no doubt about it. We continue in a deficit position, and we have been in a deficit position for more than 7 or 8 years. Current administration, County Executive Bellone, talked a lot about what he inherited. Well, unfortunately, we're still in the red every time we go out in order to try and cover our bills. So what it means is I'm forced to constantly have to try to prioritize, if you will. We're always going to pay people. They come to work for us. We have an obligation as an employer. Same thing as you. You hire people. Listen, you're taking their lives in your hands. You have an obligation to make sure that they go ahead and get paid for the job that they do. However, The decision makers, when they put that budget together in the first instance, the county executive and the legislature, in my opinion, really needs to take an adult, grown-up, and hard look at what we're committing to spend each year, because we don't have the revenue that matches the spending that they're adopting.
Now, how much say do you have over the budget? Like you said, there's an interplay between the Suffolk County Executive, Balone in this case, and the legislature.
That's correct.
How
That's
do you
correct.
fit into the scheme of things, the control?
The way I fit into it, Phil, is I'm the one that's actually charged with implementing what they adopt. I don't get to say this is a good choice or a bad choice. I get handed the bill, if you will,
Right.
and told, okay, comptroller, go out and raise the money so that we can now go ahead and implement the spending plan we've adopted. Unfortunately, and here's where we really get into some ever-increasing difficult challenges. We go into the market each year for in excess of, let's see, 410 million, another 105 million, about 550 million in short-term notes. You know, basically, that's borrowing that's less than 365 days. We have to do that. It's part of the way our property tax collection system is set up. It's the Suffolk County Tax Act. But our viability is always assessed by the rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch. Last fall, Moody's decided that we were encountering such financial risk that they dropped us to a BBB. So when we had to go into the market in December to raise 410 million in a short note, we encountered opposition that we had never had before. We could only sell 207 million competitively. Bank of America had to pick up the additional purchase and did so at another 25 basis points. What's that mean? Because of the downgrade, it cost our taxpayers another $349,380.
Right.
That's the hard cost.
It's like a consumer having a less than stellar credit report.
You
It's
know
gonna
it,
cost
you
more
see it
money to
all the
borrow.
time in your practice, as a matter of fact. Listen, we all want to go out there. We hope that folks can go ahead and get, with a good FICO score, get the preferred mortgage rate. But guess what? If you don't have that good FICO score, you're going at ever-increasing interest rates. And then when you get the home equity line of credit,
Oh.
the interest goes up. And you'll remember Household Finance. That was the
Yes.
third lender. They were approaching 15, 16, 18% sometimes. We call that hard money.
Like a credit card almost.
Exactly. And what's happening is it is becoming harder and harder for us to sell. Not only because we have the increase in the interest, but there are fewer and fewer entities that can buy. Fidelity, Vanguard, Oppenheimer, all the investment funds that we all know are barred from purchasing our paper now. We have over $1 billion in T. Rowe Price of county payroll deferred compensation plan. They can't buy our paper.
But why are we a BBB?
We're a BBB because what happens is we have a budget that spends more than we take in, and consistently what the rating agencies are saying is they're concerned about our alternative liquidity. What is alternative liquidity? What are the reserves that we can go to if we don't get the sales tax that we project? If we don't get the fees or the permits? If we don't get the land transactions and we get the mortgage recording fees? Where else do we go? What's our reserve? What's our backup? That is getting smaller and leaner, and there are fewer dollars in those reserve funds at all anymore in order to go ahead and give us the cushion that we need. So as we come closer and closer to exhausting all our reserves, our interest rates are just going to continue to go up and up. What that means is it becomes harder and harder and harder. Now, the only way that we get out of this cycle, this is like an airplane. You know what happens when you get into that spiral.
Right.
There's only one way you're going. That's to the bottom. We have to go ahead and turn around what that spending is to bring it closer to match our revenue. And as a matter of fact, if we were really good at it, put some aside to start building those reserves. The current administration seems to have absolutely no interest in that whatsoever. And I have said it, and it's like talking to that brick wall.
Right. Now, what do you see as a way, like you said, the plane out of control?
Absolutely.
And there's a point of no return.
No.
I watched this show, all these plane crashes, and at some point you can pull out.
You're right.
And where are we? If we're a plane, where are we?
We're getting
Can we
close.
pull out of it?
We're getting very, very close to being into that spiral where what'll happen is the choices now get taken out of our hands. You know, somebody asked me yesterday, I was at a forum, Leslie and I were at a forum up in Albany, and they asked if I would support an interim control board coming in, like we have in Nassau,
Nassau County, right.
to go ahead and take over and kind of take some of that local decision making out of the local deciders' hands. And I told them, absolutely not. I said, the only way I could support that or would support that is if I resign my position. The people of Suffolk County elected me to go ahead and use my best efforts to try to rectify, remedy, and cure the financial difficulties. So what do? I talk about it, I preach about it, I go to the papers about it, but I also say to everybody, this upcoming election, they have to elect people who are willing to go ahead and start rolling up their sleeves and saying, in life, there's needs and there's wants. You know, when times are flush, you get some of the wants.
Right, just
When
like a
times
household budget.
Exactly. It is no different. In the Kennedy household, we've eaten a lot of hamburger. When times were good or times were a little loose, maybe once in a while we get a steak. For Steve Ballone and the Democratic majority, it's filet mignon every night, regardless of what the budget is.
Now, the next Suffolk County executive, whoever that might be, what does he or she have to do to correct the situation?
Well, they have to take a number of steps, in my opinion. As I just said to you, first of all, it all goes back to the budget. The budget, look, there are many, many places that we can go to that we can effectuate some change. We need to, I'm the perfect example. Listen, I campaigned in 15 or in 14, and I vehemently opposed the merger of the treasurer and the comptroller. What did people do? They elected me as comptroller, and they approved the referendum to merge.
Okay.
So we took two separately elected offices, and then once our good friend Angie Carpenter became the ISLIP supervisor, we then went with the Republican caucus and we accelerated that merger process. From 2016 forward, I've been your treasurer and your comptroller. What did that mean? We eliminated 5 elected and appointed salaries that total roughly about $1 million. So we saved $1 million in 16, $1 million in 17, $1 million in 18, and it'll continue. Unless we go to the other 25 now entities throughout the county and continue to promote some consolidation, some trimming, and some, whether it's through attrition or repurposing, some consolidation of our services, we're going to wind up at a point where we may not exist as a county anymore. The state may say, you know what? We don't have to put in an interim board. We'll take DSS, we'll fully convert it to a state agency. We'll take health, most of that, we'll convert that. DPW, we'll drive that down to the towns. And you, county, you don't exist anymore. We'll be like Connecticut. There's state and there's towns. There's no county level of government
Oh,
in
no? I
Connecticut.
didn't know that.
No. You have the state level and you have the town level. Now, we just talked about, I mean, we're larger than 11 states. And there are a number of essential services that we do. But if you have a group of people who refuse to do what's necessary to get us back to a balanced budget and back to black, what are the other decision makers? What are the choices? Will the state continue to pump money into us to go ahead and to prop us up? They have their own challenges. You know that. They're what, $3 billion, $4 billion in the hole now. And they're passing bills up there like there's no tomorrow, as a matter of fact. Things that we never thought that we'd see in our lifetime.
Oh, I know that.
Recreational marijuana. Insane. It is as if the train has come off the track and we're looking at things that we had never thought we would see in our lifetime.
I talked about that in one of my shows. I'm not a proponent of the marijuana.
Neither am I. As a matter of fact, I think that it is, and you may in fact talk to my wife, who, you know, has the background as a nurse and worked in drug dependency for over 10 years. She knows the science. I look at it and I just say to myself, you know, things are hard enough now. I mean, talk to a family who's lost a child or a spouse or a sibling to drug addiction. Why? Why would we want to go ahead and regularize something that everybody points to as a gateway drug?
But the sad thing is, John, I think it's something that's coming, and I don't think we're going to be able to stop it.
Well, you know what, Phil? Listen, I'm an optimist and I'm a glass half full guy, and I do know that many of the Republicans, or some of the Republicans, are going to put in a bill to opt Suffolk County out. Now, what I heard was that there was some concern on a part of the majority because we need the money. Well, you know what? There's an alternative to that. We could spend less money. I just talked to you about what we did as far as consolidation with my office. You know, we spend $70 million a year in non-mandated contract agency expenditures. Now you sit there and you say to yourself, what are you talking about, John? Well, you know, there's youth programs and there's senior citizen, you know, art and enhancement, and there's, you know, historical things, this, that, and the other thing, outside of our hotel motel. But $70 million. And yet, every year we talk about between $100 and $150 million structural deficit. Well, let's see. Even if we pared that 70 back 20%, we'd reduce some of our structural deficit. But nobody wants to sit there and say, you know what, agency, you do a great job, but guess what? We're going to give you 10% less this year. Do the best that you can. Continue to provide the services as well as you can. But it's just got to be 10%.
Right, but you know government is not very good at tightening its belt.
Government is not very good at tightening its belt. But you know what? You and I, we're a little older than some of the folks that may even be watching us. You can remember when Mayor Beam had the city of New York.
Yeah. It's going back a ways.
But we can remember it. And as a matter of fact, it was on the brink of collapse. And the only way that it got brought out was Felix Royatin, as a matter of fact, did some creative financing with the bonds, with the refunding. But we had a sharp decrease in the municipal services, as a matter of fact. Police force was scaled back tremendously, I guess. Not that I'm saying we should do away with police officers. That's our primary objective, is public safety.
Sure.
But we do have to look at what's going on with the rest of the money we spend.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you also, we were talking a little bit about the Waste, Fraud, and Abuse Hotline. What is that?
Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Hotline, 853-5018.
Say it again.
853-5018. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to take out one of my cards, if I can find it. We have it right on the bottom there, and I'm going to say it for your viewers. It's Fraud Hotline. Fraud Hotline at SuffolkCountyNY.gov. We put that into place roughly about 6 months into my first term. Since we've had that, and that is an anonymous way for anybody to go ahead and report what appears to them to be some impropriety or something, you know, irregular. We've had it from all over, different levels of government, town, village, schools.
Do they get a reward or no?
No, you know what they get? They get the ability to be participatory. They get a voice. Over 100 complaints that have come in, 12 of them have resulted in full-blown audits. One of them was Beach Hut. Another one was Lywin. Beach Hut, as you may recall, was the vendor who operated down at Smith's Point, at Michoud, and out at the end of Cupsog. Those are 3 county properties. Somebody contacted us on a fraud hotline. I also had a couple of elected officials who raised concerns and expressed concerns. This vendor, a contract agency with our county parks department, was charging somewhere between $13, $14 a drink, vending at a bar, cash only, no receipts, no credit card, and it was like the wild, wild west. It was a free-for-all. We did observation. We actually, after a time, got enough information, and when we attempted to go ahead and get some of their records, and none were forthcoming, we then contacted the DA's office. Met with the DA, laid out the basics of our evidence. They picked it up, and actually it was sales tax. Joe Connolly, as a matter of fact, is the one that finally took it up. And we had enough platform there We were able to get state taxation and finance involved as well. They pulled all the records from the 4 Babylon Town locations, and there's a location that's over here in Smithtown, a restaurant. 8 locations. This guy was moving booze all over the place. He admitted to $3 million of unreported sales.
Wow, so
That's
Suffolk
just
County
a-
was losing a lot of money.
That's exactly, and that was just for a 24-month time period. Now, this guy's been a presence in Suffolk County for 14 years. He put $1.1 million on the table. He pled to a misdemeanor. Corporate pled to a felony. And the county executive let him out the door without paying the 2017 rents. So, what did I do? I had a conversation with our county attorney, my good friend Dennis Brown. I said, Dennis, we concluded our audit. He never paid for 2017. I said, go to court. He said, what do you mean? I said, that's a landlord-tenant action. I said, get a summons and complaint, sue him for the rent due. He said, well, I don't know if we can do that. I said, you
Why
can
not?
do that. I said, we're the landlord, they're the tenant.
They owe you.
Either you do it, or I'll do it, or I'll find somebody who will do it. 3 months ago, we had a summons and complaint filed.
Good, good.
You know, Phil, listen.
Why was he skating on that issue? Why weren't they really being more aggressive? He owed the money.
Of course he owed the money, just like over in West Hills where they owed the money. And it is because our government, in my opinion, the way it is structured, has lost its vision, has lost its priority, has lost its mission. We have an economic development department that has 86 employees, a $5 million payroll, and a county executive who wants to find people to design, master designers for neighborhoods, but doesn't want to hire an accountant or a contract auditor to go out to contract sites. We have 19 vendors. Nobody in Parks is checking them out.
You know, because there's no enforcement. All it is just the cost of doing business for these companies.
Absolutely.
They figure if I get caught, I'll pay $1 million fine, but I pocketed $3 million.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
It's not a bad business decision.
No different than the guys that were running those phantom gas stations, you remember, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Take them about 2.5 years, they get
Right.
caught,
Move
back
on.
overseas.
Yeah, I heard about that.
So, listen, I look at it, I love the job, it's a great opportunity, but I also say to myself, we're never recovering 100%, like we just said. So we got $1.1 million out of a guy that was a bad guy. 3 million, 4 million, who knows how much he was in the wind for. The homeless housing agency, Lywin, they managed to misappropriate $3.5 million in 36 months. The woman that got the contract had a felony conviction for drug sales by administrative code.
How'd you get the contract?
She was barred. Oops, we never did a fingerprint with her. They created a mechanism. The only thing they didn't do was outright abuse the women and kids that lived there. They had phantom employees, they had fictitious contractors, they had less than arm's length solicitation, they had relatives that were doing the housekeeping, the laundry, the security.
Wow.
They had a CFO, they had a financial officer who lived in Arizona, who was certifying payrolls. I shouldn't laugh. I shouldn't laugh because, again, it is egregious the amount of money that actually is going out. There we intercepted 1.4 million. We are suing her for 2 million. So if we had better enforcement, oversight, and monitoring in the first instance, less taxpayer dollars would be lost and more people would be served.
Now, what county agencies should really be looking out for that?
Well, the ones that actually are the oversight agencies. In Beach Hut's case, or West Hills, it's the Parks Department. In Lywin or Project Redirect or some of the other homeless housing agencies, it's Department of Social Services. How about right down the street here, Selden Center Reach Youth? This one was comparatively small, but still to the people in the neighborhood. $190,000 going to a man who was supposed to be providing at-risk youth services
Right.
for kids here in the Sachem and Mill Country school districts, right in the pocket. He didn't do a lick of service. And there was nobody in the Youth Bureau who was doing any kind of monitoring, oversight,
But-
or confirming the extent of his service.
Is it that these agencies are undermanned? Why are they not picking this up sooner?
Because I believe that what's happened is, you know, there's an old saying, fish rots from the head down. If nobody at the executive level is interested in seeing that the day-to-day operations of government are going properly, it breeds apathy, it breeds malaise, and ultimately, people just show up. Employees just show up. I don't disparage them. If they don't have anybody leading them, they won't rise to the level. And many of them know some of the things. Selden Center Reach Youth came from an employee who actually reported again anonymously. I'll give you one that in my wildest dreams, I never thought that I would see. And I can't talk a whole lot about it, but domestic violence. You know, when I was in the ledge, we had three things, even in 2008, when the bottom was dropping out, and we were cutting the budget like there was no tomorrow. Senior services, teen suicide, and domestic violence. We kept those three funded. We slashed everything else. We cut stuff like there was no tomorrow, just in order to be able to survive. Domestic violence, it's like Mother Teresa. You couldn't give enough money in that category because of the heinous nature of what you would encounter. Lo and behold, we're auditing a domestic violence agency, and it appears that we have some issues associated with their operations. So you become a little cynical after a while doing this, because all the things that you had kind of previously thought, you know, well, at least I'm okay in this category. No. There's no place that we can't go. And towards that end, we've increased our audit staff by 40%. I'm now up to 33 auditors. I was at 22 when I came in.
Wow.
And I can take more. It's, you know, you got to spend money to make money, and the kind of money that we've saved and brought in, over $8 million in audit recovery, $35 million in interest savings, and there's just so much more to do.
One last thing I wanted to touch on.
Sure.
Modernization. I know that's something you have an interest in.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, when I was speaking to a few other people about this, there's a couple of ways to look at it. One is from the Suffolk County executive position. One is from your agency. Now, when you think of modernization, what agencies do you think it affects the most?
Well, we absolutely affect everybody across the board. As a matter of fact, we had a financial backbone that was 6 versions out of compliance. When we called the vendor, they couldn't even recreate a test environment in order to go ahead and serve us. Again, I championed doing the upgrade. It had a price tag of about $2 million. However, what it did is it brought us into the 21st century, and it achieved compliance. We had as our primary identifier for all of our municipal claims, travel voucher, meal voucher, or anything like that, my social security number. As a matter of fact, we were in direct violation of state and federal statute that mandated that any municipal entity that utilized that had to migrate away. And we were subject to a $250,000 fine to be brought by the AG.
Wow. We got to kind of wrap things up, but I wanted to, do you ever see the movie Dave?
Yeah.
Okay. He's a ringer for the president. The president had a heart attack, so they bring him in. And what does he do? He wants to save money for this program that's near and dear to the vice president's, the first lady's heart.
Sure.
So he brings in his friend who's an accountant. Guy doesn't know what he's walking into. And they sit there all night and they talk about the budget. And they said, we can cut this here, we can cut, and they weren't very popular, but they got the job done. Now that's a movie, obviously, but that's something that a responsible politician at a high level will have to do.
No doubt. No
Like you
doubt
said,
about it.
Cut things in. Nobody wants to cut it, but look, you're not the federal government. You can't print money.
No.
You don't want to raise taxes because it hurts the economy. When people
Absolutely.
have less money in their pocket. So in a sense, it is cutting spending.
It is, but you know what, Phil? I think that there's ways that we can also look at trying to, what's our biggest expense? Our biggest expense, roughly about 80% of our budget is personnel costs. So what we need, it's incumbent on us to go ahead and get a look at, as I said to you before, where can we go? Where can we try to Maybe we have to try and do another retirement incentive. You know, I could have retired 7 years ago. Love what I do, as a matter of fact. Wife says, you know, if she's working, I'm working. But we both, you know, we love what we do. But, you know, maybe some of the members in our workforce will be okay with doing, you know, a buyout or a retirement. We have to approach a couple of different creative ways to actually bring the workforce down a little bit, but also to try and go ahead and prioritize the services that we deliver. And I think it can be done.
It can be done. All right, John, I really want to thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you so much, I'll tell you, and thank you to all the viewers. It's been a great night, and, you know, hope to talk to you again soon.
You will. I have a feeling you'll be coming in at some point in the near future. Stick around for segment 2. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm attorney Phil Giacino, and this is WLINY's Finding Common Ground here on Altice, coming at you from WLINY Studios. The next topic is going to be frequently asked legal questions. The first question is, am I entitled to my spouse's pension or 401k? That's a question I get asked a lot. One of the first questions when people come in, other than custody questions. The answer is yes, of course. Depends on how long you've been married. That will determine what piece of the pie you're going to get. For instance, if your husband is a police officer and he became a police officer in 1990 and you married in 1985, you're going to get half the pension up to the time the divorce was filed. So if the divorce was filed in 2020 and he was a cop from 1990 to 2020, let's say, you're going to get half of that pension, or whether it be a 401k or whatever it happens to be. They use the Majaskis formula. There's a numerator and a denominator. Now, let's say he became a police officer in 1990, but you married in 2010, and the divorce was filed in 2020. You're not going to get part of his pension from 1990 to 2010. That would be considered his separate property. You would get half of his pension, or whatever he has, from 2010 to the date of the filing of the divorce. Now, let's say the divorce dragged on for 3 years, and he contributes to his pension, let's say, from 2020. So 21, 22, 23, 24, the divorce drags on. It shouldn't drag on that long, but let's say it does. The contributions he's made to that pension for that period of time after the filing of the divorce, you would not be entitled to. So we would hire a company that would calculate, using the Majaskis formula, they would calculate what you would be entitled to. The same with a 401k. Now, how you get it would normally be a quadro, qualified domestic relations order. With a pension, definitely. So you'd hire a company, they calculate what you're entitled to, and they prepare documentation that one of the attorneys would submit to the Supreme Court. You can't do this in family court. It has to be Supreme Court. The judge would sign a DRO, which is a domestic relations order, that becomes a qualified domestic relations order. Some other accounts, maybe like a 401k or certain other types of retirement accounts, you may not need a quadro. You would do what they call a rollover. So I'll give you an example. Let's say there's an account you do not need a quadro. And let's say you have, now you're the one with the account. Let's say it's worth $50,000. And we're not talking about a brokerage. We're talking about some kind of retirement account. And it's worth $50,000. And your spouse is entitled to half. You don't have to spend the money to do a quadro, which is usually $500, $600. You do a rollover. So your spouse would go to some company like Charles Schwab or TD Price Waterhouse and would set up an account. Then after an agreement is drafted, a divorce agreement, the monies would be transferred into that account. Simple, right? But they would have to set up that account that's a retirement account. They just couldn't go to the bank, set up a checking account or a savings account, and then have that money rolled in. If you did that, there would be a big tax consequence. A tax consequence would be income in that year and potentially a penalty if you withdrew the money early. Even if you withdraw it from a protected account, there's a penalty, unless you're of a certain age. Let's say a couple gets married, they save, 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 and 10 years down the road, they buy a house. The money for the down payment came from them jointly, and they go forward, pay the mortgage together, taxes and all that. That's an easy one. when, if the parties divorce, at that time, the house would be divided generally 50-50. Equitable distribution does not automatically mean 50-50, but as a practical matter, it does. Right? So there are a few exceptions, which again, were for another show, but suffice it to say, it's generally a 50-50 proposition. There could be other reasons. Let's say one party makes a lot of money, one party doesn't, or there could be tax consequences, where you're getting the house, but the other party's getting something where there's a tax consequence or isn't. The court can balance it out. Now, with regard to determining who gets the house or what portion they get, remember I said the easy one is they bought it together. Let's say one party came into the marriage with the house in his name and didn't put it in the wife's name, so no transmutation. And the house was paid for already, no mortgage. And the taxes were paid for from some separate property source. And then they get divorced 10 years later. Chances are the wife would not be entitled to any portion of that house. However, if let's say they get married and they use marital funds to improve on the house or to pay the mortgage going forward, the wife could receive a portion of that house. Not 50-50, but a portion. If the husband would have put the wife's name on the deed going forward, she would be entitled to half the appreciated value, and he would get a separate property claim for what the house was worth up to that point. Valuation, what is it worth? If it's going to be sold, the parties can go to a real estate agent or broker, put the house on the market, sell it, and then split the proceeds. But if the judge is going to give, let's say, one party of the house and offset some other asset, you need to know what it's worth. Next question, what is an expert for, and what do they do? Give you an example. In a divorce action, there are a number of cases where you need an expert witness. Let's say there's a custody matter and there's an allegation that one party is a drug addict or an alcoholic, or there's mental health issues, or the child has autism, where the court says, you know what, I need to know more about the family dynamics. They can hire somebody, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, to do forensics. They'll do a report, come back, and they'll say, I think the father is this, the mother is this, the child needs this. Makes a recommendation in a sense. Maybe not saying who should win, but this is what's going on in the family. You can also have forensics when it comes to a business, forensic accounting. What is the business worth? The husband has a business. He has to give a portion of that to the wife. What is it worth? The attorneys wouldn't know. It's not as easy as a house where you can go to Zillow and get a rough estimate. So you'd have an expert, right? To appraise a house, for a business, to determine what the marital portion of a pension is. So those are cases where experts would be used. Experts are usually paid for by the parties. Sometimes a family court, the county will pick up the tab, but generally speaking, it's the parties, and it'll be in some proportion of their income. So if they both make 50, it's 50-50. If one makes 100 and one doesn't work, the husband is at least laying out the money. He may get a credit down the road where, let's say, the wife comes into a lot of assets. The judge may say, okay, you're going to get a credit for $5,000 if you laid out $10,000 to value a business, let's say. Next question. In a divorce, who pays the bills? As a general rule, when a divorce action starts, the attorneys generally tell their clients, and the court will usually tell the attorneys to tell their clients, maintain the status quo. What does that mean? If the husband was paying all of the bills while they were married, generally speaking, unless he loses his job or something dramatically changes, he will continue to pay the bills. That doesn't mean he doesn't get some kind of credit. He may not. And that doesn't mean he's going to pay the bills forever. Generally, they would pay them for a period of time. The parties would get divorced, and then child support maintenance could kick in, or kick in initially. But I'll give you an example. Let's say the husband's paying all the bills, and the wife hires an attorney. They go to court, and the court says, you know what? You're now going to pay child support in the amount of $500 a month, and maintenance in the amount of $500 a month. That's $1,000 a month he has to pay. If he had to continue to pay all the bills and that $1,000, he probably couldn't afford it. And if he can't afford it, the court could say, okay, you're going to pay that money, but now that the wife is getting $1,000, she's going to be responsible for buying food, Well, she's going to be responsible for the carrying charges. Maybe he continues to pay the mortgage, but there has to be some kind of consideration given if he has to pay child support maintenance. Sometimes he just continues to pay the bills, gives the wife a little bit of money for things, for spending money, toiletries, gas for the car, things like that. And then when the divorce is finalized, then there's a more formal structure put in place. Child support maintenance, things like that. Why do I need an attorney if I am charged with a crime? To protect your interest. If you're charged with a crime, we're not talking about a violation of law like a traffic ticket or something like that, or even disorderly conduct or harassment. We're talking about a crime, a misdemeanor or felony. If you go to court without an attorney, the judge is going to say, get an attorney and come back. Now, if you were to say, I am not getting an attorney, the DA in all likelihood will not talk to you. The DA will say, look, we're not going to give you a deal. And I'm generalizing, I would say most of the time, an overwhelming majority of the time, the DA will say, get an attorney. If you don't want to get an attorney, we may have to go to trial on this case. I'm not going to give you a deal. I'm not going to negotiate with you. Because then if, let's say they negotiate something and then the guy later is hurt by the plea he takes, he could make a motion. I didn't know what I was doing. The DA doesn't want that aggravation, so the DA is going to say, get an attorney. Or go to trial. If you go to trial, the judge will beg you, get an attorney. You can't handle a trial by yourself. Even if you're an attorney, if you don't handle trials on a regular basis, you can get hurt. You may not know the rules of evidence. You may not be able to question witnesses properly. So if you walk into a criminal court, you need an attorney. Family court, they're going to recommend you get an attorney. What is the difference between compensatory damages and punitive damages in a civil case, like a car accident or an assault case? Now we're not in the criminal realm, we're in the civil realm. This is for damages, for money. Next question. What is the power of attorney? Power of attorney gives someone else the power to handle your affairs. It could be just banking. It could be to handle a personal injury case. It could be to handle your taxes. It could be a number of things. And there's different kinds of power of attorney. So let's just say I have a partner in a business and I'm going to be out of town. I might say, you go to the closing, sign the papers for the deal. I'm giving you the power of attorney just to do that. Now, if I die before that, he doesn't have the power to do that. You have also a springing power of attorney and a durable. The springing would be, you don't need to have my power of authority, the power of attorney. However, if I become comatose, I want you to be able to carry out my affairs. Could be a spouse, it could be a partner. Durable just means it goes throughout. So I give it to you, and if I become comatose or I'm out of town or out of the country, you have the ability to carry out my affairs. And you could limit it. Just banking, everything, it depends on what you want to give that person. That is the end of segment 2. Stick around for segment 3, American Exceptionalism. Henry Ford, interesting story. Stick around. This is segment 3, American Exceptionalism. This topic is about Henry Ford, and I'm going to call it the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you'll find out why at the end of this piece. Henry Ford was born on July 30th, 1863. At that time, Abraham Lincoln was president. The country was still fairly young. Now, he came from a time when America was mostly agricultural, farming, things like that. We were advancing. You had the railroad, but it was basically an agrarian society. He transformed this country in more ways than one. And again, it's a fascinating, fascinating story. He was born on a farm, born one of eight children. And he worked on the farm with his dad. And at 16 years old, he walked to Detroit to find work off of the farm. And he got a job in a machine shop. And apparently, you'll see that he had a proclivity toward engines and things like that. That's how he had the knowledge to build later on the Model T, with the help of his engineers, of course. So he walks to Detroit, gets a job, works there for 3 years. Then he eventually returns to the farm and he sets up a shop, a little shop to tinker. Oh, now before that, he only had 8 years of schooling at a one-room schoolhouse. So similar to Lincoln in some ways, Lincoln only had less than a year of formal schooling. This is a man that became a great industrialist with little formal training. He didn't go to college, he didn't major in engineering. He was in a one-room schoolhouse learning the basics for 8 years of his first 16 years. And he didn't go to college. So for his first 16 years, he had 8 years of schooling, learned about farming techniques and machines. You'll see how he later used some of that knowledge to build a tractor. Not the tractor story like from Seinfeld. So he works in Detroit for a while, comes back, sets up a machine shop that he's tinkering around with, and he ultimately builds a tractor using an old steam engine that he developed, and also the chassis from a mowing machine. So he had the knowledge at a young age to build this tractor that he used in practical implications. He also got a job at some point with the Westinghouse Energy Company. He was always drawn to companies, power companies, automotive, things like that. That was his interest. Now, in 1892, he became the chief engineer at the Detroit Edison power plant, where he was responsible for maintaining electricity for that area 24 hours a day. A very responsible job. So he's not in the automotive industry yet, but he's in the industry that has to do with power. So he supports himself and his family. He only has one child named Edsel. Later on, he builds a car named the Edsel, colossal failure, but the Model T was a great success. Ford is celebrated as a technological genius and also as a folk hero. Very interesting story. And he was the creative force behind the unprecedented size of the automobile industry that would be known as the automobile industry in only a few decades. This was something where it didn't exist. And it came from nothing, because don't forget they had horses and carriages, to all of a sudden being something that every man could have. So he's the symbol of the transition between the agricultural society that I talked about before to the Industrial Revolution. And Ford said, "I will build a motor car for the great multitude." He didn't see this as a luxury item. He saw this as something that every man could aspire to own, and that was his goal. Now, in the 19 years that the Model T existed, that he made, the Model T, over 15 million automobiles were sold here in the United States in the 19 years that it existed. About 1 million in Canada and 250,000 in Britain. Now, he said that the car should be for the ordinary man. Now, you remember the Grey Poupon commercial where one limousine pulls up to another limousine and said, "Pardon me, do you have any Grey Poupon?" It's a commercial for mustard. He didn't see the automobile that way. Not that he didn't see that there wasn't a place for luxury automobiles. In fact, the company that he founded later turned into Cadillac, but he had left that company before then. So he saw the automobile something for every man. How he transformed America. When he came about, remember he was born during the time of Abraham Lincoln, there were no automobiles. People went around, even the president went around in horse and buggy or riding a horse. When the automobile came out, in a very, very short period of time, horses disappeared so rapidly that the acreage that was used for hay was used now for agriculture, for crops. So whereas you might have a couple of horses to get to town, you had horses to pull the plow, as automobiles came about, you didn't need the horse for that purpose anymore. The automobile became the main prop of the American economy. In 1899, he formed the Detroit Automotive Company, which later became the Henry Ford Company. Now, the fascinating thing about this was he was later kicked out of his own company. Like you hear about Ben & Jerry, they still call it Ben & Jerry, but they got the boot from the company. That happened to him, and the reason was the supporters, the backers, the investors in the company wanted him to crank out automobiles. They felt he's a genius, crank out automobile after automobile, that's how you make money. He was a perfectionist, and he kept saying the automobile, or the automobile that I want to build is not ready. And it frustrated the heck out of these investors. So eventually they said, you know what, we don't see eye to eye, move along. That company he left in 1902 became Cadillac. In 1903, right away, he didn't waste any time, he started the Ford Motor Company. With $28,000 he raised from ordinary investors. He couldn't tap into the wealthy men or the wealthy families of Detroit because they wanted nothing to do with him. His reputation was he's a perfectionist. He's going to drag this thing out. He's not going to crank out the cars, and that's how they make money. If you're going to invest in a company, you want to see a return. Ford wasn't producing a return. He sold a lot of cars, but when push came to shove, it wasn't enough for what the investors wanted. Now, to give you an example of the pricing structure of the Model T, it sold for $950 in 1908. In 1927, about 20 years later, it cost $290. Now, sometimes you think the price goes up with inflation. He created a structure, and you'll find out in a little bit how he did it, that used economies of scale, efficiencies, to lower the price of the product to make it more affordable. Now, maybe investors don't like that, but it was better for America. Now, don't forget, this was all done privately. This was not the government, right? Like the Volkswagen in Germany, where Hitler had an idea of the people's car. This was a private citizen with investors behind him trying to turn out a product that would be profitable, where money could be made. The profit motive. Capitalism, not socialism. Because let's say the government has a car company and there's no competition. It's very inefficient. Government is very inefficient. Here, private industry, one man with investors, created this company. And how did he get the price to go from almost $1,000 to about $300 in a 20-year period? How did he do that? Again, he used economies of scale, efficiencies. The key was the assembly line. Remember Lucille Ball in that episode where she's on an assembly line and it's moving too fast and she has to sort the chocolates out and it's going so fast she eventually is putting in her shirt, she's eating it. That's the assembly line. He mastered that, and he had sub-assembly lines. He was able to crank out a Model T every 24 seconds once the assembly line got started. So there was one assembly line that fed another assembly line. You had sub-assemblies. You had someone with a specific task to put the wheel on. And this is all before robotics, but you had the assembly line. So somebody might sit there all day and put the wheel on. Rather than a guy making the whole car, his job was put the wheel on. So the car would come by, he'd put the wheel on, and he'd put the bolts in, or he put the seats in, whatever the specialized skill that he had, or she had, was to do a specific thing, and that's what they had to do, and they did it well. And that created efficiencies and economies of scale. Mass production. Right? So he could also go to a company and say, you know, instead of buying 4 tires to build a car, I could buy 100,000 tires. So he's going to get a better price. He can pass that along to the consumer. Now, after much experimenting by these processes, by 1913, 1914, his plant in Highland Falls, Michigan, was able to crank out an automobile every 24 seconds. I said that before. Worth mentioning. That's incredible. So once everything got going, a car would come out, another car, and that's how he was able to lower the price. Because it wasn't a rare commodity anymore. You know what I mean? Like if you had one person build a car and it took a long time, you couldn't sell it for $300. Now, lowering the price benefits not only the American consumer, but the worker. Because this is what it created. And this wasn't the government saying you got to raise the minimum wage. He did it because he had an excellent company. He was smart. Higher wages. So he was able to raise the minimum wage, at the time I think it was $2.24, to $5 an hour. So he could attract better workers. If you're trying to get the best workers and you're saying, I'll pay you the minimum wage, you might not get the best worker. If you say, I'm going to pay you $5, you're going to get the best workers. Shorter work hours. He lowered the work hour because everything was churning very well. He was able to lower or to lessen the amount of hours people had to work. They didn't have to work 14 hours like I do. They were able to work 8 hours, an 8-hour shift. He was able, and the workers now, because they're making more money, have more leisure time, they was able to buy the cars that they were making. So through profit motive, competition, efficiencies, assembly line technology. He was able to win. He was able to beat the industry and do something that other cars companies at the time were not able to do. And this is owed to capitalism, not socialism. And in fact, in 1914, he announced that henceforth, eligible workers, I guess full-time workers who worked there a certain period of time, would be eligible for a minimum wage of $5. That was not imposed by the government. He did it. This was done privately, the free market. Now, a little while ago, I said the good, the bad, and the ugly about Henry Ford. This is the ugly part. But first, before I get to the ugly part, let me just give you a little bit about his other activities. He earned widespread criticism because he was against entering World War I. And he ran for the Senate in 1918 and lost a close race. So he was starting to get political. The ugly part is in 1918, he bought a local newspaper called the Dearborn Independent in Michigan. And he published a number of anti-Semitic writings called The International Jew. Oddly, he later renounced this, and he sold the newspaper. Very odd that he would write these anti-Semitic writings. I don't know where that came from. But he later renounced it, and he sold the newspaper. Now, in 1938, so he bought the newspaper in 1918. In 1938, now this is a year before World War II broke out. We didn't get into the war until the end of 41, actually 42, after Pearl Harbor. But he accepted the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, which is the Nazi regime's highest award for a foreigner. So he wasn't German, he was American. And he accepted their Medal of Honor. Again, this is before the war, but it was the Nazis. Maybe he didn't know of the atrocities that would come to light later. But he was anti-Semitic according to his writings, and he did accept that award from the Nazis. And his legacy, though, you have to look at the complete picture. Like we often look at people like Christopher Columbus, and they want to tear down his statue because he was a flawed individual. You judge a man during the times he lived in. All great men. Lincoln had failings. He talked about it one time where he once represented a slave owner. Not illegal to do. He represented a slave owner to get back a slave after the Fugitive Slave Act was signed. A lot of people criticize him for that. How could you're against slavery. How could you do that? Here is a man, you can't excuse what he did as far as writing anti-Semitic writings. You can't excuse it. But let's look at what he accomplished. Not excusing that. Let's look at what he accomplished. He changed America forever. And there's a lesson here. He was a smart man. I don't want to say he came from nothing. His family owned a farm, wasn't a rich guy. Minimal education, had an idea, put the time and effort into it, learned on the job, like Lincoln did, created a company. It wasn't always smooth. He lost his job, lost his company, came back stronger than ever, and he did something which transformed America forever. From the studio right now, I can look out the window, and I know that there are cars passing by this building all the time. That's something that he created. And things, not just the automobile, it changed agriculture to industrial. The assembly lines were used in other products, for other products. So he was a great man, deeply flawed, but that is the story of Henry Ford. Take care.